Hello everyone and welcome back to the Academia and Research Collective. My name is Darren Lau and today we're going to be going over how to write a research paper. Now this is a big video, right? Because by now you've already come up with your methodology, so you know how to test it, and then you've been able to test it and draw results from it, but it is now time to put everything on the paper and actually write your research paper. So we are almost near the end here, but let's get straight into it. Firstly, what is a research paper? Well, a research paper is a formal write-up of your thinking process, right? You talk about what questions you asked, like, your hypotheses or engineering goals, how you answered those questions, what you discovered, and then why those results and conclusions matter. Think of it as a blueprint of your entire project. What I like to say is that if someone were to pick up your research paper and read it, they should be able to know, even with minimal knowledge of your topic, a lot more about your topic, the question you were trying to solve, what you did, your results, and what those results mean, right? Someone should just be able to pick up the research paper and get that information from it. Now, here are the parts of a research paper, right? First, it's the abstract, then the introduction, related work, methodology, results, discussion and analysis, conclusion, and then references. So we're going to break down every single one of those 8 parts, starting with the abstract. The abstract is the TLDR of your entire paper. It should be one paragraph, 150 to 250 words. Basically, it's a basic summary of your entire project. The problem you're trying to solve, what you did, how you did it, what you found, what those results mean. Basically, you're going to take all of the sections of the research paper that I'm about to talk about and basically condense it down to 150 to 250 words, right? A great tip for this one is to write the abstract last, but you put it first in your research paper. And the reason you write it last is because by the time you've written about your methodology, your results, your conclusion, your data, all you have to do for the abstract is basically condense what you've already written down, right? Instead of writing it from scratch already, you can just condense down what you've already written into those 150 to 250 words, which is a lot easier to write so that you can actually get an idea, so that when people read your paper, the first thing to look at is your abstract, right? So after you finish writing all the most important parts, you can just pick out even the most important parts of those parts, like the methodology, the data, and the results, and put it in your abstract. So that's why we write it last, but we put it first. Now, the introduction is next. The introduction is just the basic set the stage, right? Like, what problem are you trying to solve? And introduce the key topics of your research. So, this kind of goes back to the literature review. A lot of this would have already been done during the literature review. Let's say your project is about a specific type of plant and the height and its factors. So you just want to introduce maybe a bit about the specific plant you're talking about, talk about, the height measurements and maybe why that's significant. And then if there's something else, like remember last episode or a few episodes ago, we talked about using LED lights to, the example project was using LED lights to see if that affected plant growth, right? So maybe you want to talk a bit about just LED lights in general there. But the introduction just sets a basic stage for the rest of the paper. It introduces the key topics that you will be researching. Now, next though, is the related work. This is slightly different than introduction. It talks about what's already been done in your field. This is where the majority of your literature review will basically go, right? It summarizes the most important past research, shows what's already been done, and where your work will eventually fit in. So if you go back to the literature review video, we talk about, find research that is most related to what you want to talk about. And then here is where you will summarize it. But while you were doing your literature review, if you've taken all of those notes that we talked about, this part should be relatively easy because you already have the skeleton of your related work, right? And so, if you're breaking it down by topic, like me, I had a project that had a lot about AI and also augmented reality. So I talked about and my project was also about using AI and augmented reality in medicine, right? So I talked about, current uses of AI in medicine, current uses of augmented reality in medicine, and then I talked about, finally, about, the limitations, right? Like, what is the problem of the current solutions or what's missing currently? And so that's what your related work is. It's just the past research or the past most important research that is relevant to your research topic, but a very important section. Now, next is the methodology, right? We talked about this just a few videos ago. Methodology, you want to walk through of what you did, right? Steps, tools, materials, data collection, etc. All of those important things. When we were talking about methodology, we talked about how it's important that you be specific when you write out your methodology for yourself so that you know what to follow. Basically, you're just putting that and writing it again here, except you're gonna polish it up, and we'll talk about writing tips later. But you want this to be so specific that someone can follow it to the T if they read your research paper. So your methodology should go through literally everything you did, right? The steps, the materials you used, here's what we did, here's how we did it, we measured this for every other day or something like that, right? Just make sure it is very, very specific. It talks about the entire process from collecting the data, to like gathering the data, sorting the data, whatever is needed for your methodology to make it specific and reproducible. You should put that in the methodology section. Just remember, be specific. And then the results section. Results section is just graphs, tables, charts, etc. Throw that all in the results section. Do not do any interpretation. I cannot emphasize enough. For your results, do not interpret the data, right? Don't do any comparisons yet. You can have a table with comparisons. That's okay. But don't talk about the significance of your results yet. Don't like write paragraphs comparing your data yet. Just put the raw data there, right? If you have a graph, put it there, have a title to the graph. You can put you can put a little note under the graph that says, this graph shows blah, 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 right? That's okay. But no major interpretations yet, just what your data says, right? So when you were graphing out your own data into like bar graphs or maybe pie charts or line graphs or whatever, or just tables even, and to analyze the trends and stuff, put that there, right? Your results section should have those in there. But remember, it's just the basic results, no interpretations until the analysis and discussion section. Here's a section that's also super, super important. Now is where you talk about what does your data mean, right? Why is this data important? Did it support your hypothesis? Did it support your engineering goals, right? You want to talk about that there, right? Let's say you said that your hypothesis was that the height of plants would grow to 6 centimeters or something, right? And then you'd be like, from figure 1, which is, let's say, a table, you can see that our plants grew to an average height of only 5.8, which means our hypothesis was disproven. Or you could say, if you have an engineering goal of building something, you can say, well, our results show that we weren't able to successfully do it. Maybe there was a benchmark. Remember, when you talk about engineering goals, there's supposed to be benchmarks. Well, you can have benchmarks. Let's say your benchmark was that this device works, is very quick and can do its job in, let's say, 1 minute. But our results show that it averaged 2.5 minutes, right? Whatever your thing needs, this is where you talk about that. Also, discussion analysis, talk about any surprises. If something came up that was unexpected, that was super unexpected, talk about it. This is a very important stuff. Also, limitations. Do not forget limitations. All good research has its limitations. It has its flaws. Talk about what might have gone wrong. Or things that did go wrong, right, in the testing, or that shows in the results, right? That's something that you absolutely should put. It's very vital. And lastly, comparisons to past research. I mean, I think I've emphasized this before, but comparing your work to past research is super, super valuable. Talk about how different methodologies have lined up, method A from this author, method B from another author, method C from this group of authors, and then compare it to your research as well. That's where you do all of this. The discussion analysis, it'll be a longer section, but it's super, super important because it is really the heart of why does this research matter? Like, after you've done all of this stuff, you've gathered all of this data, why is this data important? That's why the discussion analysis is so key. And then we have the conclusion. The conclusion can be much shorter, really. It just wraps everything up, talk about the implications, talk about the significance of your research, and then you can mention also just what's next. The conclusion, sometimes I've seen conclusions are a bit longer, maybe a few paragraphs, but I've also seen conclusions that were just one paragraph, right? It's just a basic thing that wraps everything up, talks about the significance one more time, and then what's next. You can just try to basically, and sort of like a summary, right? It's a bit similar to the abstract in some sense because it's like a summary, but the abstract kind of talks about everything a bit more. Conclusion is just wrap everything up, talk about its significance, and then you can mention future work. And I think you should mention future work. That itself is a good tip. In your conclusion section, talk about what you should do next, right? Can this research be adopted to other fields? Maybe you talk about limitations in your discussion and analysis. If you were to do the experiment again, maybe how you would change some things or to improve on your experiment. All of these things can go in your conclusion. And then finally, the references. Just list every single source you used. Please keep track of all of your sources. We do not want any plagiarism. If you mention a source during the introduction, it should go here, right? If you cited it during the literature, during the related work section, it should go there. If there's a math formula you cited when talking about your math methodology that came from another research paper that is cited, you put it here. Every single source is cited here and organized. You can use many citation formats. I've listed some on the screen, right? APA, MLA, IEEE. These are all specific to different research fields. Well, APA and MLA are kind of more general. IEEE is for more STEM and computer science, but maybe there's a type of specific citation for a research journal that you want to use. That's okay. Just make sure it's consistent. That should be obvious, right? Don't use half of the citations be APA and then another half is MLA and then a bit of it is IEEE. That makes no sense. Just keep everything organized and keep everything in the same style. So now that we've gone over every single part, let's go over some quick writing tips. When you're writing your research paper for all of the sections, just use simple, direct language. Don't overcomplicate, right? If you need to get into the technical stuff, if something is advanced, yes, do talk about it, with the amount of words that it takes, that it doesn't like make everything cluttered. Really, this tip is just don't clutter anything, right? Keep everything word efficient, get your point across, explain the necessary stuff, and then that's it. Also, avoid the passive voice. So instead of, the experiment was conducted, you should say we conducted the experiment, or in this experiment. And a good test for this is a by zombies trick. You might have heard about this in English class. If you add by zombies to the end of a sentence and it still makes sense, that's grammatic, and it still makes sense, then that's in the passive voice. And we want to avoid the passive voice. So for this example, the experiment was conducted by zombies. That still makes sense, right? So that's a passive voice. However, we conducted the experiment by zombies doesn't make any sense, which means it's not in the passive voice. That's just something to keep in mind. Also, have visuals. Graphs, tables, like bar graphs, pie charts, we already talked about those, but also have images, right? If there's an experiment where, you use some sort of data set, or you created your own images or something, put those there. For our plants example, put photos of the plants there, right? Show its progression with images, right? You should have images in there. A lot of times when people are reading a research paper, they might not read every single word, but they'll definitely look at images. And images just make the paper interesting. It can help you convey your point across. So put images, graphs, tables, visuals are a must. And then just keep in mind to always explain your choices, especially in the methodology, right? So why did you choose this method, right? Were you testing this method? Is this method more efficient? Is there past research that says this method is good, right? Talk about that. And then also, why were these results significant, right? That also comes back to explain your choices. So whenever you do something, you always want to think, I'm going to justify my choice for doing this. Here's a reason why. And then proofread. This should come as an obvious sign. We don't want grammar mistakes in our research paper. This is technically a formal piece of writing. So, misspellings, incorrect comma usage, an apostrophe that's used wrong, fix those. Proofread it. A great tip is to actually just read your paper out loud. If the paper sounds odd out loud, then it's most likely grammatically incorrect. Also, of course, don't forget to check your spelling. Here are a few more tips. Don't use slang. Remember, formal writing. Avoid personal opinion and dramatic phrases, right? Don't say things that just basically is like a gross exaggeration of something, right? We just want everything to be neutral and focused on the facts and the evidence, right? There shouldn't be personal opinions. An extreme example would be like during the literature review, you would be like, this research is bad, right? Don't do that, right? No personal opinions, no dramatic phrases. Keep everything neutral and just solely based on the evidence. And then also, try if you can to avoid the I and we pronouns in writing a research paper. I mean, this is just a common standard. It's not like super necessary, but I've seen it very commonly done. Right? You can say like this experiment showed, or the researchers found. That's okay, but avoid I and we if you can. But that's just a formality. And so, one last tip is that the best way to write the best research paper is actually just read research papers. I'll link some, once again, research papers in the description below that I think you could go through. Even if it's not related to your topic, they have good formats there. But as you're doing a literature review, you're going to be reading a lot of research papers. So you can see how authors are actually doing their research papers. And a lot of different professors teach the research papers in different ways. So if there's a specific style you like how they organize something, the tone of voice they use, then yeah, you can use that and be inspired from it. But the more research papers you read, the better it is. And then here are some basic tools that you can use. Word and Google Docs for writing a research paper, Zotero, we talked about, to keep your sources organized, Grammarly, keep everything grammatically correct, and also Obsidian, which we also talked about for organizing your thoughts, or Notion. I know a lot of people use Notion as well. But here are just some generic tools you can use. I personally prefer writing my research paper in Word. I think it's just easier, but of course, that's just a personal preference. But you should try to stay as organized as possible, because the more organized you are, the quicker you can write your research paper instead of scrambling to find stuff all over the place. And finally, the checklist. Keep these things in mind throughout your research paper, or at the end of it, actually. At the end of it, if you want to go down your research paper, here's some very important questions just to prevent common mistakes I've seen. First one is my research question clearly stated, right? Do I know what I'm researching? Have I stated my hypothesis clearly? Have I stated my engineering goals clearly? Have I made it known to the reader what I'm trying to do? That's the first one. Second one is my methodology detailed enough to repeat? One of the most common mistakes is that people write their steps assuming that the reader already knows their methodology. Don't do that. Be specific. And then are my results and analysis separate, right? The data section should only have data, not analysis. The analysis section should be where you do all the talking about the significance of your data, right? Those two things are separate. And then did you cite all your sources? Remember, no plagiarism, keep everything organized. That's why we use Zotero or Obsidian. And then does my writing make sense? Grammar makes sense. Is it a logical flow? Am I talking about everything I need to talk about? That's the last question. So there we are. That's it. That is the writing of the research paper. This is a longer process. I tried to not make this video too long, just go over the basics. Please read some of the research papers that I've listed below, or when you're doing a literature review, you'll inevitably have to read research papers, and from there you can gauge how formal academics really write their research papers. And even if this is your first time ever writing a research paper, I think that it is something that is super, super valuable. I hope this video gave you some help. Thank you very much for watching the Academia Research Collective, and I'll see you next video.